Who is the most underrated player on your favorite NFL team? What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another video on the channel today. In this video, I kind of wanted to take a look at every single team and give a player that I think is the most underrated on that team. Now, full disclosure, a lot of these guys on this list you probably never heard of. And to be honest, I had not heard of them either until I did some research. So these are not like your A-list, commonly known players in the NFL. These are some guys that really not a lot of people know of. But I wanted to do this video, and I kind of wanted to appeal to every single fan base that watches this video because I wanted to give attention to some guys who really aren't getting attention. So before I get into my list, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are on the road to 500. We're trying to reach that before the season starts. And like I said in the beginning of the video, make sure to comment on if you agree with my list or not. Starting off with these Chicago Bears, I have Tevin Jenkins. I think Tevin Jenkins is a really underrated guard. I loved him coming out of Oklahoma State a couple of years ago, and I think that he could be really solid. Now, the Bears' offensive line has had a bad reputation the last few years for being dog shit, which is fair. But Tevin Jenkins, I think, is legitimately a really good guard. I would put him, I think, at his best, he could be a Pro Bowler. Now, he's dealing with, I guess, 2 cap strains, which sucks, so we won't see him to start the year. But I think Tevin Jenkins is a building block that the Bears' offensive line has for many years to come. Speaking of another offensive lineman, I got to give my big boy some love. Elgin Jenkins for the Green Bay Packers. He has been very solid for many years, and I don't think he gets the respect he deserves as one of the better linemen. I think not only is he really, really good, but he's also versatile, and that's a very underrated trait. There are some guys in the offensive line that could really only play 1 or 2 positions, but Elgin Jenkins has moved around, especially when David Bakhtiari was hurt. He played left tackle, he's played on the right side, he's played left guard. He's been all over the place. He's been a solid piece for the Packers offensive line, and I think he's very underrated by the public NFL opinion. Next, for the Detroit Lions, I have a guy by the name of Kalif Raymond. I think he's actually pretty good. And I think with Jameson Williams being suspended for the first 6 games of the NFL season, he is going to have an opportunity to show the NFL world what he can do. Is he going to be productive? Is he going to struggle? I tend to believe that I think he will be pretty productive. I think he's pretty solid. Again, not a superstar by any means, but I think this is a guy that not a lot of people know a lot about. And I think he's pretty good. I think he can make some big plays for the Lions this year. For the Minnesota Vikings, I have Garrett Bradbury. Garrett Bradbury is, for my money, one of the better starting centers in the NFL, and nobody really talks about him. I mean, he's been on Minnesota for a few seasons now, and he's just been solid. The Vikings offensive line, everybody knows about the addition of Christian Darrisaw, which is great. Garrett Bradbury, he's just a solid center, man. And there's a lot of teams in the NFL that could really use a solid center like Garrett Bradbury. Not a lot of people talk about him, so I think he's probably one of the most underrated players on the Vikings. An underrated player on the San Francisco 49ers is Drake Jackson. I'm cutting a little deep here for a second, but what I'm going to say is I think Drake Jackson is very talented. And the reason I think that he's an underrated player that you guys are about to learn about is because Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, and Eric Armstead are all fantastic players on that defensive line, right? And if they are getting all of the attention from the offensive line, the opposing offensive line, that leaves Drake Jackson with favorable matchups, right? He is going to get a lot of one-on-ones. He's going to have opportunities to show that he can go get the passer. That's why the 49ers drafted him. So I think Drake Jackson is a guy that I've heard a lot of 49ers fans talking about him. I think Drake Jackson is a guy that could be due for a big season in 2023. Next, for my Seattle Seahawks, and this is one that I tell you, like, I know the Seahawks well, and this is a guy that you don't know who he is yet, but you will soon. That's Boye Mafe. Boye Mafe is an edge rusher out of Minnesota, was drafted in the 2nd round last year thanks to the Russell Wilson pick that the Seahawks got. He really didn't do much last year, but from all reports, from all players, coaches, interviews, he has been the most improved player on the Seattle Seahawks from last season. He has taken a big leap. He has been pretty good in the preseason so far, and the Seahawks, their pass rush was like pretty good last year. Like I think they were like 10th or 11th in sacks. They could jump up a little bit with Boye Mafe, and I think he'll be a better run defender than Darrell Taylor and Uchenna Nwosu were last year. I expect Boye Mafe to have a big season in 2023, and he is, at this point, the most underrated player on the Seattle Seahawks. Next, for the Arizona Cardinals, a guy that is just reliable, James Conner. He is underrated, I think. I was tempted to put Rondale Moore, but honestly, I'm not too high on Rondale Moore, and I think people kind of see him as underrated, which kind of makes him overrated. You guys know how that cycle goes. But James Conner, man, he's just solid. I mean, ever since he's been in Pittsburgh, he's just been a solid back. He is about to be, I think, fed a lot with Kyler Murray out for the Arizona Cardinals. He's just solid, man. I mean, he's a bruiser. He's not fast by any means, but he gets it done, man. And how can you not root for the guy? I mean, he's a cancer survivor. How could you not love James Conner? That doesn't necessarily feed into my underrated ranking, but I think he's underrated. People kind of think the people I talk to kind of think he's garbage, which like he's not top 10, but he's not garbage by any means. He's a good running back, and he's probably the only good offensive player that the Arizona Cardinals have right now. For the Rams, to be honest, man, I kind of struggled coming up with one for this. But I'm going to go with a guy that I think could be utilized a little bit better and a guy that could be a much better player, and that's going to be Tutu Atwell. Tutu Atwell, he's small, right? But he's quick, he's fast. He kind of gives me shades of Tavon Austin back when he was with the Rams. Obviously, Tavon Austin really didn't have, Sean McVay to call plays for him. But if the Rams, I think, can incorporate him better into the offense, and if he could be a complementary piece to Cooper Kupp, this guy could be pretty underrated. I mean, people are not really giving anybody on the Rams offense attention other than Cooper Kupp. And if he is a solid wide receiver, I think that could be, a pretty good get for the Los Angeles Rams. Next, going on to the Atlanta Falcons. This is a guy who is one of the most underrated players in the entire NFL. Kaleb McGary, the tackle. I mean, last year, the Falcons ran the ball pretty much better than anybody in the league. And to do that, you have to have athletic tackles. You have to have tackles that go out and go get the defenders. He's been really good, right? He has been really, really good. He's just been solid. It's really, really hard to find like really good tackles in the NFL. I think the Falcons have one. And like I say, he's kind of like low-key under the radar. Like people don't really talk about him that much. He's a good tackle. I promise you, he's a good tackle. And if Desmond Ridder is going to succeed as the successor to Marcus Mariota in the Falcons offense, they are going to need good tackles. For the New Orleans Saints, the first rookie coming on the list, and there's a few rookies, so keep that in mind. A.T. Perry, I think, is very, very underrated. He's underrated in the draft process. He's a wide receiver. I really liked his tape. I studied him in the pre-draft. I really liked his tape. He's going into a situation with a stable quarterback situation in Derek Carr. I don't really see anybody talking about A.T. Perry, to be completely honest with you. I think A.T. Perry is going to be a pretty good receiver in the league. I think he's going to be one of those guys where we look back a few years later and we're like, wow, that was a steal for the Saints. And, I think that he is an underrated player. Nobody's really talking about him. And, yeah. Going on to another rookie, though. This guy is undrafted. Sean Tucker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a running back. I think that running back spot in Tampa Bay is wide open. I mean, I'm not a big Rachaad White fan, and I think this guy was legit in college. I mean, he really was legit. There were some medical issues, during the draft process, and that really caused him to not be drafted. But if you take those medical issues out, I mean, he's a dog, right? He was probably going to be, I would say, probably a 4th or 5th round pick. I mean, he's a really good running back. He's going to do it. I think he's going to get his opportunity in Tampa, and he's going to show the NFL that he is a pretty damn talented runner of the football. For the Carolina Panthers, my underrated player is going to be Frankie Louvu, the linebacker. I know that the Panthers defense has a lot of other young stars that get attention, right? Brian Burns, J.C. Horn, Jeremy Chin. Don't underestimate this guy on this Panthers defense. I think that he has been a very solid linebacker for them. And again, a lot of these players, they're not superstars. They're not top 5 at their position. They're just guys that are just solid. And they're guys that they don't get talked about a lot, right? Frankie Louvu is one of those guys, I think. I think Panthers fans will know what's up when I'm talking about Frankie Louvu. He's really good. I mean, he's good. I really, really like Frankie Louvu. And again, you can never have enough solid players, especially for a young team like this. Frankie Louvu is a piece that you really want to have going forward, and I think he's the most underrated player on the Panthers. For the Philadelphia Eagles, the reigning NFC champion, it's kind of hard to find an underrated player on the Eagles just because they're so popular, right? They won so many games last year. They went to the Super Bowl, so even the most casual fans probably knows the Eagles roster up and down. But let me give my shot at this. I'm going to say the most underrated player on the Eagles is Landon Dickerson. Landon Dickerson is part of one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. And to be completely honest with you, he is probably the least popular player on that offensive line. Jason Kelce is more popular. Jordan Mailata is more popular. Lane Johnson is more popular. I would argue that before he left in free agency, Isaac Smoliano was more popular. Landon Dickerson is a really, really good left guard in the NFL. If you guys remember, he played center at Alabama. Obviously, they moved him to guard because they had Jason Kelce. He is really, really good. He's got center flexibility. He's a really, really solid offensive lineman. Pass pro as well. He's pretty athletic. He's tough. I mean, there's a lot of good things to say about Landon Dickerson. Obviously, he run blocks well. The Eagles ran the shit out of the football last year, and I think they will again this year. So, Landon Dickerson, a guy that just doesn't get enough love. I think he's one of the better guards in the NFL. Going on to the Dallas Cowboys, my underrated player for them is going to be Malik Hooker. Malik Hooker, I think, kind of has a bad reputation as being a bust, right? Coming out of Ohio State, he was pretty hyped, I would say. I remember him. I remember the hype coming out of Ohio State for him. Went to Indianapolis, just kind of just couldn't put it all together. Dealt with some injury stuff, and I think he kind of got off a lot of people's radar. Malik Hooker last year in Dallas was really good, right? I mean, obviously he had that scoop and score touchdown against the Indianapolis Colts, but I think going to Dan Quinn's system has been really good for him. If you guys remember, Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator with Seattle, and what has Seattle always had? Good safeties, right? Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor. I'm not saying he's in that vein. I'm not saying he's a top 10 safety. I'm saying I think he's underrated because people kind of wrote him off as being a bust, but I think that he is a pretty solid safety in the NFL, and if he can continue to learn under Dan Quinn's tutelage, he could put together a pretty good career for himself. Next, for the New York Giants, I have Isaiah Hodgins. Isaiah Hodgins came in last year and was probably the only legit weapon in the passing game that the Giants had towards the end of last year. Really played well down the stretch. And again, do the Giants have a weapon? Do the Giants have a receiving weapon? I mean, ideally, you would like Jalen Hyatt to be that guy, but I wouldn't necessarily bank on a rookie, third, fourth rounder. What was he? So for my money, he's probably still the best receiver on the New York Giants. I think that he is going to get more snaps this year. He's going to have more playing time and everything like that. So, I mean, people aren't really talking about him. Deservingly so. He wasn't, a dominant force early in the season last year, but I think he's pretty underrated. I really liked what he did, what he put on film at the end of last year. For the Washington Commanders, my Madden players out there will know who this guy is. Carmen Curl, one of the best safety, like low-key one of the best safeties in the NFL, does not get brought up in that conversation literally ever. Part of that is because the Washington Commanders are kind of, an irrelevant franchise. Sorry, Commanders fans. But Carmen Curl is legitimately like one of the best safeties in the NFL. I would put him top 15, you know what I'm saying? And he's just been really solid, like really good. I think he's really good in pass coverage. And again, just doesn't get talked about enough. He's just not a big name. I know my Madden players know he's like a budget, user safety, cool. But man, he's legit like a really good safety in the NFL. And I really do think that the more he plays well, the more he's going to get recognized, and the more I think the consensus will be that he is a top 15, 20 safety in the NFL. Next, we are now transitioning to the AFC, going with the Cleveland Browns, and I'm going to attempt to pronounce this name correctly. Ogobanye Okoronkwo. Listen, last year he put up a career high with 5 sacks, and I think that this was a sneaky good get by the Browns in free agency. He's not one of those big-ticket guys. They let Jadeveon Clowney walk. Ironically, he signed with the Baltimore Ravens for more money. I think this is a good value get. I think he could low-key be an underrated player playing opposite of Myles Garrett, like I mentioned with Drake Jackson, the 49ers. Because of that, he's going to get favorable matchups, right? He's going to have an opportunity to see what he's going to do. They also added Dalvin Tomlinson to their defensive line, so their defensive line is much improved, and I think he's going to be a big reason why. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm going to go with a running back not named Najee Harris. I'm going to go with Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren, I think he's got a lot of big playability in him, and we see it in this preseason game just a couple days ago. I think he had 1 carry for 62 yards and a tud. I mean, respectfully, Najee Harris is not taking that to the crib. And Najee Harris, understandably, he's from Alabama. He's the first-round pick. He's the workhorse, right? Jaylen Warren, I think, will be a very nice change of pace for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense because he provides a big play ability that Najee Harris just doesn't provide. And I think if he can continue to progress as a receiver and he can continue to accumulate more snaps, he could be a good weapon for that Pittsburgh Steelers offense that is low-key getting a lot of really good young talent. They improved their run blocking, especially with the left tackle Broderick Jones and with tight end Darnell Washington. I think that he could be a really good player, and I think that right now he's kind of flying under a lot of people's radars. Next, for the Cincinnati Bengals, I have linebacker Jermaine Pratt. Now, he is, again, probably not as good as Logan Wilson, his teammate. Again, just an underrated guy. He's just a guy that doesn't get a lot of attention, doesn't get a lot of hype, isn't, on any of your top 10 lists, but he's just solid, man. I mean, he's really, honestly, he's really good in pass coverage. Like, watch him in pass coverage. He's like low-key really good for a linebacker. And again, with him and Logan Wilson, that's a really good linebacker core they have in Cincinnati. So I think, again, this is just an underrated guy for the Cincinnati Bengals. For the Baltimore Ravens, shout out my boy TTB Ravens Media for giving me this one. Isaiah Likely. Now, Isaiah Likely, I know he's kind of mainstream, but I do think that he is getting overshadowed, obviously, by Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely is a playmaker, man. I mean, you saw in a lot of games last year where he was just making plays. He's got a big catch radius. I think he's a better athlete than Mark Andrews is. And honestly, when Mark Andrews gets old and or retires here in the next few seasons, maybe, I don't know, I'm just speculating. I think Isaiah Likely is going to be able to come in, take more snaps, and be more involved in the passing game. Now, additionally, with new offensive coordinator Todd Monken for the Baltimore Ravens, they're going to emphasize that down the field attack. They're going to push the ball vertically. And I think Isaiah Likely is going to be a matchup nightmare down the field for safeties because he's too big and he's too fast for linebackers. So I think he's a very underrated player for the Baltimore Ravens. Next, for the Kansas City Chiefs, I have Trent McDuffie. The Chiefs' defense was different with Trent McDuffie. When he was playing well towards the end of the year. They were a different unit. They have young DBs all over the field. Him and L'Jarius Sneed are, not very old, right? And Jalen Watson, not very old. He, I think, impressed a lot last year. For a rookie to get that much playing time and for a rookie to have as much responsibility as end of the year, he was covering T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, right, in the AFC Championship game. Plays in the Super Bowl. He's covering A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Now, granted, he got cooked a little bit, but the fact that you could throw a rookie back there and be mostly fine for the most part in two of the biggest games of the year, I think says a lot about Trent McDuffie. And again, that Chiefs defense when he was on the field was a much better unit. I think Trent McDuffie is an underrated player for the Chiefs. Next, for the Denver Broncos, a new addition, come free agency, Zach Allen, the defensive lineman formerly with the Arizona Cardinals. Zach Allen is legitimately a really good defensive lineman. The Cardinals' defensive line last year kind of fell apart, when J.J. Watt got hurt, everything like that. Zach Allen was solid. Zach Allen is really good, and Zach Allen is going to a Denver Broncos team that I think lost some D-line help last year with the loss of Bradley Chubb to the Miami Dolphins, but now they've gained, Frank Clark and Zach Allen. They also lost Draymond Jones, who went to Seattle. So I think you're making a lateral move from going from Draymond Jones to Zach Allen, who, again, I think is really good. And, again, I don't think he gets talked about a whole lot. So Zach Allen's my underrated player for the Broncos. For the Las Vegas Raiders, this is the guy who I'm sure all of you have probably heard of. But, again, I don't think he gets the credit he deserved because he had kind of an off year last year. That's Hunter Renfrow, one of the best route runners in the NFL, in my opinion. He's got solid hands. He's a great route runner. Again, he's not the fastest guy. He's not the biggest guy. He's not going to go up and contest a catch one-handed, come down with it. He's just a solid slot receiver. And solid slot receivers are probably not too easy to come by. And, again, if his quarterback situation would be a little bit better than Jimmy Garoppolo, I think people would be like, okay, Hunter Renfrow could put up some yards. He could score some tutties. Unfortunately, he's got Jimmy Garoppolo, which is not his fault. But I think that Hunter Renfrow is a pretty solid receiver. And people forget how good he actually is. Next, for the Los Angeles Chargers, this is another one where I kind of had a hard time coming up with somebody. But I went with Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett has been just a productive tight end everywhere he's went. The Rams, the Seahawks, the Chargers. I know he had that play last year where he stopped running his route, but homie was gassed. All right, homie was gassed on that play. But he's just a solid tight end. And especially in the new Kellen Moore offense with the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, Dalton Schultz was used all the time in Dallas. I think that's going to be the same thing in Los Angeles. He's not, again, the fanciest tight end you've ever seen. He's not the most upside like Kyle Pitts. But Gerald Everett is just a solid tight end. People kind of forget that, and for that reason, I think he's underrated. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, honestly, one of my favorite players in the entire NFL. I love Jamal Agnew. He's one of the few return specialists, right? He just does work. You guys remember that field goal he took back for a touchdown against the Arizona Cardinals? It's just shit like that, man. I feel like that style of NFL is just dying out ever since Devin Hester and Josh Cribbs left the NFL. And Jamal Agnew would be the guy in the current NFL to bring it back. I love Jamal Agnew. He is a return specialist. He's kind of a gadgety player on offense. I think they might incorporate him more. It's like a jet motion kind of guy. But even if he's just a straight return specialist, probably the best returner in the NFL. Maybe that's a hot take. I don't know. I love Jamal Agnew. I had to throw him on this list. For the Indianapolis Colts, another guy that you probably never heard of. His name's E.J. Speed. He's a linebacker and a special teams ace. Now, I was reading some reports. I did way too much research for this guy, by the way. I was doing some reports. His coaches love him. They love him. He is a dog on special teams, I'll tell you what. And I think last year he had about 60 tackles, so pretty decent numbers. Again, a guy that not a lot of people have heard of. He gets overshadowed by Shaq Leonard, because he is actually a really, really good linebacker for the Colts. And I think EJ Speed is solid. Again, I'm not talking about all pros. I'm not talking about Pro Bowlers. I'm talking about guys that are under your radar. EJ Speed is under your radar, and I think he's a pretty solid football player. Next, for the Tennessee Titans, another name that I'm going to attempt to pronounce, Chiggy Okonkwo, the tight end. I know a lot about Chiggy because I had him in fantasy, and then I traded him. But the point is that I think that a lot of people know that Chiggy is going to be a breakout candidate at tight end. I do think he's a bit underrated because the national media hasn't caught up to him yet. Like, the fantasy football nerds are like, oh, yeah, like, he could break out. But I still think that he's pretty good. And on a Titans offense that really doesn't have a lot of weapons outside of Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins, he could be a guy that's very involved in whatever remnants of a passing game that they have. And I think that he's pretty underrated up until this point. For the Houston Texans, one of my favorite players on this list, Nico Collins. He's underrated. Coming out of Michigan, he is a solid wide receiver, right? And I think people don't really know which young Texans wide receiver is going to be like the guy, right? Is it Nico Collins? Is it John Mechie? Is it Xavier Hutchinson? Who is it going to be? It's going to be Nico Collins. I'm telling you. Nico Collins is that guy. He's been good. I remember watching him back when he was at Michigan, and he was quietly pretty productive the last couple of seasons with David Mills throwing the ball. Now with second overall pick C.J. Stroud coming in, he's going to have a lot better quarterback situation. He's going to be a lot more – the balls are going to be a lot more accurate. Let's just be honest here. And I think he's going to put up good numbers with the Houston Texans. All right, getting to my last division, the AFC East. The Buffalo Bills' underrated player is Gregory Rousseau. Gregory Rousseau, he's made some plays, right? And again, everybody wants to talk about Von Miller. Everybody wants to talk about Matt Milano and Trayvon Edmonds before he left in free agency. I think Gregory Rousseau is a sneaky good defensive end in this NFL, in this league, and I expect him to take another step forward in 2023. He's a young guy, but I think you've already seen a lot of flashes of a really, really good play from him. And again, if this Bills defense is going to continue to be dominant with Von Miller going down last year, they're going to need Gregory Rousseau to step up even more. Next for the Miami Dolphins, the guy that they signed in free agency, David Long. He's a linebacker. This guy's really good. This guy's like really, really good. And he is joining a defense that is now coached by Vic Fangio. I am very excited to see what this guy's going to do in 2023. One of the most underrated players in the entire NFL. He plays linebacker for a Titans team that, again, not very exciting, but this guy is good. I promise you. He's going to be good with the Miami Dolphins, and he's going to improve their defense. Getting into my last two for the New York Jets, a guy by the name of DJ Reed. Now, he used to play for the 49ers, got picked up by Seattle, and that's where he kind of made a name for himself, right? It was in Seattle. And to be completely honest with you, he left to Seattle, signed with the Jets, and people kind of forgot about him because of Sauce Gardner. But that dynamic duo at cornerback works because of the veteran leadership of DJ Reed, in my opinion. Obviously, Sauce is the more talented guy. Gets more recognition. But DJ Reed is a low-key, really, really good corner. Signing free agency was solid last year. It's going to be a great duo with Sauce Gardner. And I think people don't talk about him ever because they just all want to focus on Sauce Gardner. And then for the New England Patriots, called this one a hot take. I don't know. I really like Bailey Zappi. I know. But I think he's underrated because people want to just, slobber all over Mac Jones. And I get that. Like I said with Najee Harris, first-round pick, Alabama, makes sense, right? Bailey Zappi, he like low-key balled. He was like low-key balling last year. And I don't know, man. I think he's underrated. I think he's probably better than Mac Jones, which would probably get me killed. But that is my list for one underrated player on every single NFL team. I want you guys to let me know what you think down below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Peace out.